Have you ever recognized that dismissive avoidant attachment styles tend to really care about what their parents think of them? And they tend to really deeply value their parents' opinions. If you've recognized this and are curious as to why, there tend to be five underlying reasons that all sort of contribute to why this happens. And also, it's really important to recognize if you are a dismissive avoidant, where some of this is taking place, and also recognize like, is there something you may want to change about this, maybe from an individuation perspective, longer term? So of course, it's healthy to care to a certain degree about what your family thinks and what their opinions are of you. But where it becomes unhealthy is if it prevents us from individuating. If we are putting people's opinions of us on a greater pedestal than we are our opinions of ourselves and what makes us happy and what makes us feel fulfilled. So, for example, if a dismissive avoidant is in a situation where they're in a career that their parents wanted them to be in, but they're really unhappy with, this is where we get into problematic territory because ultimately you're going to be spending your waking life in that career doing that stuff, and if you're unhappy it affects you. So the five major reasons that dismissive avoidants care so much about their parents' opinions are: number one, they derive a deep sense of stability and safety from their parents. Dismissive avoidants tend to really care about harmony, safety, stability on a deeper level. In the short term, and when they're first getting to know people and just beginning to invest in relationships, it may not affect them as much. But in the medium to long term, and especially the commitments they make and the relationships that are established for them in their lives, they really value that stability, that certainty, that sense of safety. And they derive a lot of that from their parents or caregivers as a general rule. Number two, a very similar principle is they tend to derive a great sense of comfort from this. So dismissive avoidants really care about their subconscious comforts. Another reason for this at a deeper level is because dismissive avoidants spend a lot of time in very low level fight or flight mode. So they have these chronic, very small feelings of being unsafe on a regular basis. And so people, situations, things that represent stability, comfort, safety, harmony, these sorts of things, they tend to place a lot of value on at a subconscious level because they're essentially trying to equilibrate from that uncomfortable feeling of unsafety that's sort of plaguing them in the background. It's often more expressed for the dismissive avoidant as like irritation or impatience. But that irritation and impatience is actually a result of being in this very low level fight or flight in the background. So that's number one and two. Number three is this is something that's really interesting is because the dismissive avoidant gets a connection from their caregivers growing up that's very harmonious, but very light and actually not that emotionally deep as a general rule. Dismissive avoidance, because of that programming, end up building a connection to their parents where they feel like this is a form of attachment that doesn't feel vulnerable and thus doesn't feel threatening according to their subconscious comfort zone sort of core wounds and fears. So because they learn to fear vulnerability in childhood because it makes them feel neglected or rejected, and they make negative emotional associations to vulnerability, as they grow up into their adult lives, they tend to place extra value on relationships that don't feel threatening. And it's interesting because it's almost like the parental relationship bypasses the vulnerability, but still has these kind of deep roots because there's been a lot of history there and connection there across time. And so dismissive avoidants feel like there's this depth of the connection, which there is, without triggering vulnerability fears to the same degree. And so you have this sort of relationship that's bypassed the dismissive avoidance fears, but still meets their needs for connection on a deeper level. And so it creates this like very special relationship for a lot of dismissive avoidance in their eyes. Now, by the way, if you are in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant or you are a dismissive avoidant yourself and you're like, I want to work through some of these different fears that I'm having in my life, things that are showing up in my romantic relationships, perhaps, or if you're the loved one of a DA trying to sort of figure them out, we have a course called How the Dismissive Avoidant Shows Up in the 6 Stages of Relationships. And it actually maps out the roadmap of the dating stage, honeymoon, power struggle, stability, commitment, bliss stage, and all the different challenges that are likely to be there, exactly step by step for how to overcome those challenges. It gives you a roadmap for that. And then some of the different fears and pain points and different ways to communicate through those things as well. And it's essentially the roadmap for how to keep the relationship progressing so you can get to the bliss stage. And if you are the DA, exactly the things you need to work on within yourself. And if you're the loved one of a DA, the things that you need to work on with them, like the ways you can communicate to get your needs met and show up and share. Anyways, you can check that out for free for 14 days. For Mental Health Month, we have a 14-day free trial to PDS. It's not just that course, it's actually all of the attachment style courses that you have access to, along with every other course in PDS. Boundaries, communication courses, reprogramming your subconscious mind courses, healing family relationships courses, you name it. And for that 14 days, you'll get access to the daily webinars we do Monday through Saturday. So if you want to join me on a webinar, ask me your questions, I'll be in there. You can come on camera, you can just type in your questions, and we have trained facilitators that do webinars 3 days of the week, and then myself 3 days a week. So literally a webinar almost every day, so that you can get extra support and your questions answered. You can try out the whole platform using that link below for free for 14 days. The reason number 4, so we've got stability, we've got comfort, we've got this attachment that bypasses the wounds, that doesn't cause the DA to feel vulnerable, but still has this level of depth to it. And number 4 is dismissive avoidance actually have this huge shame wound, as you probably know if you watch this channel. And so the dismissive avoidant, their original source of feeling shame was actually from their parents. And it's not because their parents are bad or bad people or anything like that, but because neglect, having this like sort of emotional neglect pillar of the relationship, not being nourished, causes a dismissive avoidant to feel some sort of way about themselves. So they carry this deep shame wound and they're terrified of their parents rejecting them in some way or disagreeing with them or giving them a hard time for something because it really is going to bring up all of those deep rooted feelings of shame. So they try to avoid that and kind of stay worry free about that by trying to really care about what their parents think and feed into doing the thing that their parents would be okay with. And it's not even like they're trying to win their parents' approval as much as they're literally trying to avoid feeling shameful and ashamed. So it's like moving more from fear than from trying to like win something over. Both are technically moving from fear, like fear of not having the approval, but at its roots, it's much more about avoiding shame than winning the approval. And last but not least, dismissive avoidants tend to view their childhood as idyllic. I've literally heard these exact words from so many dismissive avoidant clients over the years. And what I mean by that is it's interesting because we have these different pillars of connection, right? We've got our mental pillar of connection, which is like intellectual. We share our thoughts, opinions, ideas. We have a debate. We talk about politics, philosophy. That's mental. Emotional is like we're vulnerable. We open up about our feelings. We talk about our needs. We connect. We share ourselves and our truth. We share different, insecurities with each other. Like that's that emotional pillar. And then we have physical, and then we have sexual connection. And obviously, sexual connection doesn't apply to these types of relationships with parents, right? But you've got in the other areas, you've got this really strong pillar of intellectual connection that takes place, this really strong pillar of physical connection, which can be physical affection, and that can be missing a lot from DAs, but can it also just be like the physical environment that you grow up in, like roof over your head, structure and stability, in school on time, picked up from school on time, like that dynamic of that structure, like that physicality pillar. And those tend to be well nourished for DAs for a lot of them. Sometimes we've got really overt neglect that takes place for dismissive avoidance, but the vast majority of the time it's very covert, very subtle neglect that's really pervasive over time. But that emotional pillar is not very well nourished or well fed, so to speak. And so the dismissive avoidant, what's really interesting is like trauma can be things that didn't happen that a dismissive avoidant needed, right? And not having that emotional nourishment can be traumatic. But from a dismissive avoidance point of view, it's like you don't know what you don't have, right? Like it's like an unknown because that it's not like there was all this emotional nourishing and then it was taken away. It was like it was never really there. And so dismissive avoidants don't tend to think that they had trauma or painful events in childhood. They see their childhood as like, well, there's the physical stability, there's the mental intellectual stability, there was, routine and structure, and everything felt kind of harmonious and safe. And so they tend to see their childhood as like pretty perfect, not realizing that there's this like unknown piece of emotional nourishing that wasn't really there and wasn't being met. And that plays a huge role in terms of how dismissive avoidance um, actually become dismissive avoidants in their upbringing. So they care about their parents' opinions because they tend to have this sense of feeling like they owe them or their parents did so much for them, which on many hands is very true. But nevertheless, there was absolutely this pillar of those emotional needs not being met and nourished. And so they often don't realize this. And so they don't really have anything to see that was wrong about childhood. And so they tend to have this really positive view of their parents um, to a very, very strong degree, which is really nice in many ways. And like, I'm not saying that they should have a negative view. But what I am saying is that sometimes when we don't realize that there was trauma in these subtle forms, we don't really get a chance to acknowledge it and to really heal it and move through it and sort of nourish ourselves in the areas that we didn't really get the nutrients we needed, so to speak. So, really powerful work for dismissive avoidance to, of course, be doing. And hopefully, this makes a lot of sense. If you are a dismissive avoidant or you're a loved one of a DA and you're really wondering, like, why do they worry so much about their parents' opinions? So, again, you can check out all of PDS for 14 days for free using the link below. And please like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy this video. I put out daily videos here every single day, 7 days a week. And if you hit the notification bell, you won't miss any.